The second macromolecule we're going to talk about are lipids. Lipids are not true polymers. They rather have subunits joined together with bonds, but they don't form big long chains. And so if the carbohydrate chains I just showed you were like a necklace, you could think of the lipids more like an earring, because they're not going to form as big and long of a chain. But they do, all the molecules in this category are hydrophobic. And what makes them hydrophobic? They have an abundance of those nonpolar carbon to hydrogen bonds. So that makes the molecules nonpolar, and everything in this group has largely nonpolar nature. So that's a diverse group of hydrophobic molecules. So this is the structure of a fat. Another word for this is a triglyceride. And so the structure of this is that it's made of these 3 subunits, or 4 subunits, I guess, or 2 specifically different things. The first is a 3-carbon alcohol called a glycerol. And then there are 3 fatty acids attached. So this is a long hydrocarbon. A fatty acid is a long hydrocarbon. And then if you look at the very end of this, you'll see that carboxyl group. And that carboxyl group, remember, has acidic properties. So that makes this long chain called a fatty acid. So the fat part is this long hydrocarbon, and then the acid part is that carboxyl group. The carboxyl group is going to join with the glycerol in a dehydration synthesis reaction to create a linkage known as an ester linkage. So that's the bond you need to know here. And then each glycerol is going to have 3 fatty acids attached to it to make a triglyceride, a triglycerol. Those mean the same thing. So that's a function of your basic fat, what you would find in avocado oil, olive oil. Fat in your body is primarily this molecule as well. So these are called triglycerides or fats. And this is one of the most common types of lipids, or abundant lipids. The fatty acids in a triglyceride can come in either saturated or unsaturated forms. So this is a saturated fat here. You can see the structure has been abbreviated in the ways we described in the last unit. And then you can see the space filling model here. This is called saturated because every carbon has as many hydrogens as possible attached to it, compared to the unsaturated fat over here, where there are some carbon-carbon double bond. So that carbon-carbon double bond causes the fatty acid here to make a kink or a bend, and that prevents those from packing together as tightly as the saturated fats. And so ultimately what that means is that unsaturated fats tend to be liquid at colder temperatures, whereas saturated fats tend to be solid at cold temperatures. So animals like us that maintain a body temperature of a warm body temperature are going to use saturated fatty acids in their bodies. So we have the fats in us are typically these saturated fats. This is especially true in the cell membranes, as we'll get to in just a second. But organisms like plants that have to live in cold environments and don't maintain their own body temperature, or organisms like fish that swim in cold waters, are going to have more unsaturated fats to keep their fats liquid at colder temperatures. So plant oils are unsaturated, fish oils are unsaturated, especially cold water fish, whereas a few plant oils like tropical oils like avocado oils can be more saturated. This is also true for coconut oils. So if you've ever bought coconut oil, you know that it's kind of more has a tendency to solidify if you leave it on the shelf in your pantry, as opposed to, say, olive oil, which stays liquid. So this is just describing what I just said, that fats made from animals are called saturated fats. Most animal fats are saturated. with the exception of those things like cold water fish. And then plant fats tend to be unsaturated with the exception of some of those tropical oils. There is a way to convert an unsaturated fat, a plant fat like a vegetable oil, to a solid at room temperature like margarine is through this process known as hydrogenation. And this can lead to the formation of what we call trans fats. This is cross links between the fatty acid tails. And these trans fats are a particularly unhealthy form of fat. They're very stable. So you find them in things like Twinkies and bakery products that have really long shelf lives, but they're very unhealthy for you as well. And so nowadays our nutrition labels often list the composition of a snack, say, and list whether they have a significant amount of trans fats in them, because these are known to be correlated with poor health outcomes. The second type of lipid is shown here. It's a phospholipid. It's similar to the triglyceride, but a little bit different. First of all, it just has 2 fatty acids rather than 3. Still has a glycerol backbone. Still has an ester linkage, but then it has a phosphate group attached to it. And you remember the phosphate group as having charge associated with it. It's actually a very hydrophilic functional group. And so we have this hydrophobic tail and the fatty acid and the hydrophilic head, and you get this phospholipid that's sometimes cartoonized to look like this. And these make up the cell membranes of our cells. And they form this bilayer where the fatty acid tails form the center of the bilayer and the phosphate heads form the outside, interacting with the water outside and inside the cell. Whereas the oil forms this layer in the middle that sort of serves as a hydrophobic core of the membrane. And so these phospholipid bilayers make up your cell membranes, and they regulate passage of material into and out of your cells. So we're going to spend a whole chapter this unit talking about the cell membrane and how materials cross. For now, let's just recognize this phospholipid. It's got these fatty acid tails. Again, the fatty acids can be unsaturated or saturated. The unsaturated are more common in plants. The saturated are more common in animals. These are going to be liquid at cold temperatures. These are going to be solid at cold temperatures. And so that's the difference between those. You got this glycerol backbone and then the phosphate head, which is the hydrophilic portion. These are sometimes referred to as amphipathic because they have this 2 natures, hydrophilic and hydrophobic nature. Another member of the lipid group is cholesterol. And we looked at this structure in the last unit. Hopefully you remember that this is almost entirely a hydrocarbon. So each of these carbon rings is all hydrocarbon. The only oxygen is this one hydroxyl group here. And so cholesterol and then the other steroid-based hormones like testosterone, estrogen, cortisol all also fall into this lipid category because they are hydrophobic.